Yeah, I think the reality is the talk of the Super League has been around for quite some time. The last few weeks, maybe the last few months, particularly with the UEFA Champions League reform proposals that were coming in, had seen an increase and a ramping up of the talks for a European Super League. And we know that the big six in the English Premier League have always been quite keen on maximising their revenue. And of course, their European counterparts seem to be in the same boat. And unfortunately, as a football fan myself, I don't find it overly surprising at all. Yeah, I think what we saw, if we just think about the English Premier League for a moment, in 1992, I think the cash injection that came from Sky to establish what we now know as the Premier League was probably quite welcome. It was against a backdrop of falling attendances, broken stadia, and so on and so forth. But we're really in a position now where there's so much money in the game. The only way you can really differentiate yourself is by earning even more money. And unfortunately, that has meant well, I say unfortunately, for many that aren't necessarily worried about the business side of the game, it means that the game is being taken further and further away from what it was originally constructed to do. And let's face it, that was to entertain. But now, absolutely, and through some of the ownership that we see at a number of these really really large clubs, the prime motivation is through profit maximisation and lining owners' pockets rather than benefiting fans on the terraces. That's where the real tightrope is, isn't it? So if the Premier League, you know, ejects, dispels, dismisses all of these teams that are looking to join the European Super League, it naturally devalues its competition because we know that the Premier League has got a global appeal as a consequence of having the likes of Manchester United versus Liverpool, for instance, being broadcast right across the four corners of the globe. Now, if you remove those teams from that competition, then naturally you devalue what that competition is worth, both to the media rights holders, so your Sky TV, your BT Sport domestically, and all the commercial partners and the sponsors. But when you remove somebody, you're hoping that something comes through to take their place in time. So I think it would really devalue the competition of the Premier League if they were to expel them. But actually, I don't see any other alternative to it, because if the Premier League allows these big six teams to participate in the Super League, they will naturally become so much bigger than all of the rest of the competition in the Premier League from a financial point of view that it would render the competition entirely uncompetitive. And we think we've got a big problem now with the big six dominating our national leagues. I think we'll have an even bigger one in 2 or 3 years' time, and there will simply be no way into that big six for any of the teams in and around it. Well, if we look at this really pragmatically, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that a club director would ever do this, but if you look at it really pragmatically, none of those big six teams need fans in through the gate on a Saturday afternoon to make money every year. You could have empty stadiums playing out week in, week out for any of those teams. They'd still be able to turn a profit as a result of the broadcast and the commercial sponsorship revenue that they generate. So I think it completely rips up anything we thought that some of these clubs actually stand for. So, Liverpool as an example, you'll never walk alone, the People's Club, try and engage with their local community, young kids, kicking their football against the Kop end at Anfield for generations. I think it really flies in the face of what that club stands for. And in fact, I'd say that across all the big six in the UK, to be perfectly honest. But we mustn't underestimate here the power of the US market, the power of this big US exposure in the ownership of English Premier League clubs. Of course, Liverpool through the FSG group, in many ways leading the way in some of those discussions. And the reality is that American sport is built around a franchise model. It's built around being able to pick a team up in any particular area and move it for the right reasons. And it's all about revenue generation. And clearly, these American owners at the likes of Liverpool and at Manchester United think that their value is much higher away from their core heartlands than many fans will want to really accept. And on Sunday evening, when the news was being reported and before the official announcement, I was very much of the mind that this is a big posturing move. This is thumping of the chests by some of the Europeans' big clubs to try and exercise some power away from UEFA and say, if you're going to run this Champions League reform, then we want a much bigger say about where it's going to go. And the best way we can leverage some of that power is by coming up with our own competition. I think post-announcement, what's clear is that you've got a very, very substantially sized bank behind some of this. There are clearly some plans in place to move this competition forward in a much more aggressive way than I think many of us were expecting yesterday. So my initial thoughts were it was very much a posturing exercise. think today's UEFA reforms are going to be really critical about the next stage of any potential development. And actually, as I sit here now, I am really wondering whether this is a proper, serious competition, despite the rather ropey logo that they've announced today, to deliver something that is very, very unique across the European football landscape.